to the national grid, which in turn supplies your home.
Bag yourself a little treat this week with any 2 pouches of chocolate for £5. Like Happy's Heroes, Celebrations, Roses and Quality Street. Morrison's. Make good things happen. Majority of stores and online, subject to availability. 357 grams to 450 grams, £4 each, eggs 13 August.
So I saw Claire on Tuesday at the salon and she said,
I want to get a car for my husband.
and I said, that sounds like a fair trade. And she said,
I want to get a sporty little convertible.
and I said, you need Cinch. And she said,
Cinch?
yeah, Cinch. Cinch lets you buy a quality check used car online. No haggling, with delivery included and a 14-day money-back guarantee. And she said,
So I'm the boss.
and I said, you're in the driving seat now, babe. Cinch. Cars without the faff. UK mainland delivery only, T's and C's apply.
I'm sorry. You have progressive memory loss.
When you hear these words, the outlook is bleak. But at Recognition Health, the brain and mind experts, we're working to change that. Volunteer for our clinical studies to receive free access to a new generation medication, as well as comprehensive medical screening. With your help, we can change the future of MCI and Alzheimer's disease.
You have progressive memory loss. But here's what we can do.
Go to brainandmindexperts.com.
Eddie Mayer on LBC.
With Sage, boss your business admin from anywhere.
The G7 summit ends. Boris Johnson says the G7 and the UK has leverage over the Taliban with aid. He says it's the number one condition that the G7 is laying down, insisting on safe passage beyond August 31st for those who want to leave. There's no change to that August 31st deadline as far as Joe Biden's concerned. And by the way, we're still standing by for that news conference. In a moment, we'll catch up with Tim Marshall, former Sky News diplomatic editor. I want to turn to Ben Kentish, our Westminster correspondent now. Ben, what do you want to tell us about what Boris Johnson's been saying?
Well, clearly this has been a failure of Boris Johnson's intention at the G7 meeting, and nobody doubts that. Also made it very clear that the Prime Minister and allies, Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel, would be lobbying Joe Biden to extend the deadline, extend the 31st of August deadline, after which, according to the current plan, which is still the plan after that meeting, US and UK troops have to leave Kabul airport and have to stop their evacuation missions, at least on the ground in Afghanistan. Well, what people in government are already saying is once Joe Biden had made his mind up on this, Eddie, there was no going back. He had his people in the US, the Pentagon among them, saying this is too big a risk to US Army and US troops on the ground. There were fears about a suicide bombing. There were fears about the Taliban turning on US troops. It was the former of those two that I think was the most pressing concern. But what Joe Biden was getting from friends and allies, and also critics in the US, was if there was an attack on US servicemen and women, and some lost their lives, it would be a disaster. And he did not want to happen. Once that decision was made, there was no turning back. However hard Boris Johnson and Emmanuel Macron and so on lobbied him, that was the decision that was made. So they did fail. This is a recognition, of course, that when it comes to even the G7's policy on Afghanistan, it is effectively in many ways the US's policy on Afghanistan. When it comes to this, we are still so dependent on the US. Talk to people in government about any sort of prospect of the UK staying on. There is zero, even if other countries had potentially said they might consider it. So if all goes to plan, according to Joe Biden's timetable, and US troop withdrawal starting from this Friday and finishing on the 31st of August, that will be when British troops withdraw too. That is it. Joe Biden has made the decision on behalf of the G7, and while Boris Johnson, I'm told they did try to lobby him to change his mind, they did so unsuccessfully. It was a failure. What people in government do point to, though, Eddie, is the statement that's been put out. Lots of talk about cooperation, lots of united statements around things like how and when and under what conditions they might recognise the Taliban, they might work with the Taliban, what the Taliban would need to do that, and also focus already turning to phase 2 of the sort of evacuation plan, and work is underway already and working pretty quickly to set up some sort of system whereby people who aren't able to get out of Afghanistan have to apply their asylum in all the G7 countries. So, thank you.
Tim Marshall was a writer, was Sky News diplomatic editor. Tim, everything good viewing coming from the G7. What do you think?
Oh, fait accompli.
protection, and they don't really have very much. And unlike before, I think if the Americans go, the British don't have a choice. I think several weeks ago when the Americans said they were leaving, 2,500 of them, at that point the other 27 NATO countries could have filled the gap. But now they don't have very much air cover once they have no air cover once the Americans are gone. A few hundred troops. Supposing a shooting match did break out, what are the British troops going to do? They can't be resupplied, there's no air cover, they've got all those thousands of civilians all around them. It would be a disaster. So if the Americans are going, everybody else is going.
When Boris Johnson said it was his number one condition, safe passage beyond August 31st for those who want to leave, I put that to two very experienced military men in the last hour, decades of experience, including years in Afghanistan, and they basically said it was nonsense.
What do you mean, the conditions and the
So the idea that the UK could insist on safe passage.
yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the sort of language that they just put in communiques. I mean, you could have scribbled this one down on the back of an envelope. The Britons and the rest of the G7, including even up to a point the Americans, are in no position whatsoever to impose conditions upon the Taliban. They've won, they're in charge, they're holding the cards. If they chose to, they could right now kill large numbers of foreign troops. Now, they would pay the price, there would be a backlash, but they know that we can use words in communiques like insist and conditions, but they know we're not going to do anything about it. And if they've made it plain to us that you're going to leave by the 31st, we're going to leave by the 31st. The only bit of truth in the communique is about the leverage being on the funds. This is why they are holding back on recognition. They're going to see how it pans out over the next few weeks. If there are not too many egregious human rights abuses that you can nail down have happened in the capital, because we are going to be blind, completely blind in the rest of the country, where anything can happen, at that point they may hold that out as a carrot. But, leverage, who's got more leverage? China, with the border, or us?
And China and Russia are, diplomatically speaking, on manoeuvres.
They are, notably the Chinese. I mean, they are unencumbered by caring about what type of government a country has or any systematic human rights abuses in that country. They don't care. They have a policy of complete, they call it non-interference. And so they are next door. There is not that long a border, and it's a very rough terrain, but you can cross it. So they've already won an assurance from the Taliban that the Taliban will not harbour anti-Chinese groups. And they don't bother themselves with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They are bothered about the Taliban having a group which would cross the border to help the Uyghurs, because just across the Chinese border, that's Xinjiang province where the Uyghurs are. They've got that assurance. If there's not going to be a solid border, if it is going to be the Taliban, the Chinese will be happy to recognise them as the government without any conditions other than we'll do the reconstruction, you'll employ our firms, and we'll go and get your rare earth materials. That's conditions and insistence, not so much the G7.
Tim, thank you. Tim Marshall, writer and former Sky News diplomatic editor. Sarah's on the phone from Geneva, of all places. Sarah, good evening. How's Geneva?
Good evening. Actually, it's right in the center, as everybody knows, of historical world espionage. And when I asked this question, my grandfather was Afghan and Paris, and besides the point, the recent president, and you see, thank goodness that people can air their was M4. But this old man told us on television, this is what everybody has to look out for because it's going to happen. Please do not consider the Taliban and people who are civilized. Do not be short-sighted like this. When you have a father who recently on television described how one of the Taliban, and I'm so sorry, anybody who has sensitive ears.
Well, Sarah, just be careful what you're about to say. We don't want to.
Yes, well, you know, one of the Taliban just took one of his sons and with a knife, it's beautiful how everybody is getting involved, but people do not understand. These are like mindless believers.
Sarah, thank you. That's Sarah from Geneva, passionate, as you could hear. Mark says total incompetence on every vital front, and always with the "we are better than everyone" messaging. Disgraceful. And your anti-Kinnick texter needs to move into the real world. Sorry, Eddie, but so many things are wrong at the hands of this shower. And Mary says it's not good enough. If you were selling your house, would you start packing up the day before the completion date? It's shameful. And Tom in London, just to be clear, by leverage, Boris Johnson means UK taxpayer money and aid, right? So the Taliban now have control of billions of pounds of military equipment we sent to arm an Afghan army. And in pursuit of allowing our allies to leave the country, we're now dangling the carrot of more money to the organisation we've been fighting for 20 years. A couple of weeks ago, says Tom, Tories were arguing successfully for a reduction in foreign aid spending. So how do people who got Boris Johnson into office feel about the substantial resources we're now seemingly offering to the Taliban? What do you think of what you're hearing out of Downing Street tonight? 0345 6060 973. August 31st is 1 week away. Thomas Watts at 6:30 has the headlines.
Boris Johnson says G7 leaders' number one condition from the Taliban is safe passage for people who want to leave Afghanistan beyond next Tuesday. President Biden's expected to confirm that American troops won't remain in the country after that deadline. Police looking for Claudia Lawrence have begun a search operation in gravel pits near her home in York. Officers believe the chef, who went missing 12 years ago, was murdered. The Rolling Stones drummer Charlie Watts has died at the age of 80. Sir Elton John has described him as the ultimate drummer, the most stylish of men, and brilliant company.
LDC Business Update.
With Direct Line Landlord Insurance, get multi-property insurance.
Figures show house sales slumped by nearly 2/3 last month after the stamp duty holiday. Figures from HMRC show just over 82,000 went through residential properties in July. It compares to more than 213,000 in June as people rushed to beat the deadline. The weather mostly clear spells across the UK tonight. Low cloud continuing to affect some northern and eastern coasts with some drizzle in places. A low of 12 Celsius.
LDC. To run a growing business is to be on a journey. And along the ride, you'll encounter challenges every day. Dell Technologies advisors understand and are here with the right tech solutions, including secure PCs with Windows 10 Pro, so you can stop at nothing for your customers. We'll do more with modern devices and Windows 10 Pro. Call a Dell Technologies advisor today on 0800 085 4878. That's 0800 085 4878.
There is a new way to sell your car. It's to sell your car from home way. That you don't have to haggle with strangers way. The car dealers compete to give you the best price way. It's the you could get up to £1,000 more way. No way you say? Yes way. The your car gets picked up from home way. By the way, did we say it's the completely free way? This is the new way to sell your car. This is the motorway. Sell your car at motorway.co.uk.
We connect your business to your customers. We integrate your e-commerce with our logistics. We warehouse your stock and dispatch every time you make a sale. We are fulfillment.co.uk. From your store to your customer's door, you sell it and we'll do the rest. And we pick, pack and ship for as little as £1.88 per order. Search wearefulfillment.co.uk. Putting the
motorvehicle.co.uk.
Use code SUMMER to save £5 at singflowers.com. Sing Flowers. Amazing every time.
Whatever your business needs, there's one name you must know. The Safety Supply Company, stopping over 115,000 lines for next day delivery across the UK. So whether it's safety gloves in Glasgow, lanyards in Liverpool,
Safety rallies in Swansea.
fire buckets in Birmingham,
Knee pads in Newcastle.
or litter pickers in London, remember, the Safety Supply Company has it all and much more. If you need it, you've probably got it. The Safety Supply Company.co.uk.
Picture this. Static cars, idling engines, angry horns. Now, picture you zooming past it all. Light and breezy. The sweet feeling of whizzing past traffic. Book your train journey via avantywestcoast.co.uk. Avanti West Coast. Feel good travel.
On LBC.
With Sage, take control of your local business.
Keen to hear from you what you make of what's coming out of Downing Street tonight after the G7 Afghanistan summit finished. By the way, we are still waiting. Sorry for sounding like a broken record. We're still waiting for President Biden news conference, which was tentatively scheduled for 5 o'clock UK time. Here we are at 25 to 7 and no sign of it. If it starts before 7, promise, my life depends on it. We'll go to it. But I want to know from you what you make of it. We'll give you a bit more of Boris Johnson in just a second, should you just be joining us. But 0345 6060 973. A lot of listeners wondering. We had a text earlier, and this one backs it up. The UK government needs to stop thinking we're still a world power. We are not. Does all of this make you wonder about Britain's role in the world? Global Britain runs the slogan, but really, and we talked in the last hour about whether Britain could go it alone and even holding the airport in Kabul. What is our role now? 0345 6060 973. Keen to hear from you too on the text and on Twitter. If you are particularly sad to hear about the death of Charlie Watts at the age of 80. He had been ill, we know. There were many tributes coming in. I'll give you some of them in a moment. But the Rolling Stones, and Charlie Watts in particular, were fans of many generations around the world. If you saw them play live, if you're a drummer yourself, you'll know in particular why so many people refer to Charlie Watts as one of the, if not the greatest drummer in the world. If you want to pay tribute to Charlie Watts or talk about him, having watched the Stones, what he meant to your life, you can text 84850, tweet at LBC. Text 84850 on Charlie Watts. And we're still taking calls on the usual number 0345 6060 973 on the G7 and Afghanistan and frankly Britain's role in the world. Boris Johnson after the G7 was asked what leverage the country's had over the Taliban.
I'm totally realistic about the Taliban, and I don't think that anybody is going to pretend that this is anything other than a very difficult situation. But that doesn't mean that we should ignore the leverage that we have. We want to help with the humanitarian crisis, the difficulties that people in Afghanistan, people fleeing Afghanistan, are going to experience. But when it comes to engaging with the Taliban, engaging with the government in Afghanistan, whatever its exact composition, the G7 has huge leverage. And today, the G7 agreed, we brought them together, and they agreed a roadmap for future engagement with the Taliban. So that, if those huge funds are going to be unfrozen eventually for use by the government and people of Afghanistan, then what we're saying is Afghanistan can't merge back into becoming a breeding ground of terror. Afghanistan can't become a narco state. Girls have got to be educated up to the age of 18 and so on. And those are important things that we value as G7.
Elias listening to all of that in High Wycombe. Elias, what do you think? Hi.
I'm not sure what's going on here because countries like Britain and America create these problems by going and do what they're doing. They actually encourage these people to fight each other. They put the seeds there. Do you know what I mean? And now they're going on like humanitarian. You know, so one day they're like this, it's my way or no way, and the next day they're going like this. I mean, when are they going to learn? I mean, you know, there's so much tragedy goes on in the world, and 9 out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, Britain and America is somewhere involved politically trying to sway things for their political agenda. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous.
Thanks, Elias. How worried are countries in the region around Afghanistan? We heard from Tim earlier talking specifically about China. Let's hear now from Sami Hamdi, who's a Middle East writer and journalist. Sami, welcome to the programme. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Which countries will be most worried about what's going on next door?
That's actually a very good question. I think the essence of the issue is that the way the Taliban have taken Afghanistan means that they have a very unique agency whereby it does not appear that they lean towards a particular orbit. And given the geostrategic location of Afghanistan, Afghanistan has the potential to hurt all of China, Russia, Pakistan, and India. And all of these four powers that I've mentioned are competing with one another, and all of them view Afghanistan as absolutely essential in achieving their geopolitical aims, just as the US believes Afghanistan is key in achieving its geopolitical aims in the region. So therefore, all of these countries, I would say, are equally worried about where the Taliban will go. Will they go towards the US and to the Western orbit in this pursuit of international recognition, which it does appear the Taliban are going towards? Will they go towards the Chinese in exchange for easy loans and money and infrastructure, given Boris Johnson is threatening not to release those funds that the Taliban need in order to rebuild those countries? But beyond the region, there are also the countries such as Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and these other countries that have security agreements with the US, who are absolutely in shock at the manner in which the US, which was the guarantor of security in Afghanistan, has withdrawn. And this has now caused a debate in Japan as to whether the constitution needs to be changed so that they have their own armed force, whether Korea now should pursue greater independence, whether Taiwan can trust the US with regards to China. So when it comes to the regional powers and how they're looking towards Afghanistan, the core essence is Afghan agency, and the Gulf states such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, which brought an American base on the basis that the Americans would prevent the Saudis from ever invading Qatar or ever asserting itself on Qatar. Now, when Qatar sees how the US withdraws from Afghanistan, it now revises as to whether it should invest those billions in expanding a US military base that it's no longer sure will serve its purpose in terms of upholding the security. So I know that there's quite a few dynamics of it, but at the heart of it is this idea that the Taliban in Afghanistan have a very unique agency that doesn't actually exist in the region. And the final point I'll make on this so people understand what I mean, Biden can push bin Salman to end the war in Yemen. Biden can force bin Salman of Saudi Arabia to reconcile with Qatar. He can force bin Salman to embark on reforms. He can force the UAE to leave Yemen. He can force Qatar into unfavorable positions. But the US has limited leverage over the Taliban. Russia has limited leverage over the Taliban, as does China. So it is this, and given Afghanistan's geostrategic location, that is the source of the problems and the source of the headache amongst many foreign policy circles, as everybody scrambles between a very difficult choice as to whether to accept the geopolitical realities and necessity of the Taliban from the US perspective to use them against China, or from the Chinese perspective to use them against the US, or whether they should abide by the issues of human rights that are being advocated, trying to pressure the Taliban at the risk of alienating them without ever securing the gains that you're after in the first place.
I'm interested too. We've heard a lot about leverage today, and the leverage that Boris Johnson thinks that the G7 might have. From what you've just described, however nervous some of Afghanistan's neighbours might be, the Taliban might believe it's got lots of leverage.
The Taliban has significant leverage, especially if it can pull off what it's trying to do at the moment, which is to bring together the unruly tribes, which is to bring about an unprecedented accord in the modern century in Afghanistan between tribes that descended into civil war in the 1990s after they drove out the the Russians, if they manage to secure that domestic accord, which limits the ability of India or Pakistan or China to really encourage one faction over another, then suddenly the Taliban look much stronger. But when Boris Johnson is speaking about leverage, he talks about the economic side of things, which is one angle that perhaps Johnson might be looking at it, but he's looking at it from the wrong perspective. What the Taliban wants more than anything else is international recognition, because it's becoming abundantly clear that even Pakistan, which is the most ardent backer of the Taliban in terms of supporting it throughout this conflict that we've seen, even Pakistan is saying that we will not officially recognize the Taliban if the US doesn't. Qatar, which is an ally of the Taliban, is very nervous, doesn't want to recognize the Taliban unless Biden recognizes. It's clear that everybody is waiting to see whether Biden will deal with the Taliban or whether he will recognize the Taliban, because the alternative for the Taliban is that Biden chooses not to recognize them, imposes sanctions, and even if the Taliban ally with